to you by Tammy Cakes, the Alan Lindsay's Movie Memories Museum, and East Tennessee Media.
Welcome everybody to another wonderful edition of Baseball Now, brought to you by Tammy Cakes, the Alan Lindsay Movie Memories Museum, and of course, East Tennessee Media. I am your host, as always, Scotty Cashin, and we have got another exciting week for you as the season continues to churn and get closer and closer to the playoff season. We've only got a few more weeks left of the regular season. A bunch of teams fighting for that last couple of playoff spots. So we're going to send it on down to our Atlanta, Georgia studios for Thomas, our lead analyst, to give us a look at our weekly rewind and recap brought to you by Tammy Cakes. Thomas?
All right, thank you, Scott. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Week 19 recap. We had a lot of blowouts on this week. The first game, we'll take a look at the Dominators. That's myself, Thomas. 585 points, moves to 12-7. And the Gatlinburg Cubs, that's Scotty, at 345 points, moves to 5-14. A close game during the week that got ugly as the weekend went on. Next game, the Demon Ducks, Greg, 589 points. He moves to 12-7. Over the Macon Chili Dogs, Ken, at 402. He moves to 7-12. Nothing to it this week for Greg on this game. The next game, you've got Just a Little Crazy. That's Dan at 476 points. He moves to 12-6-1. And then you have the Warner Robin Bombers. That's Jackson at 340 points. He moves down to 7-12. And the Wildcats, another win this week. It took until Sunday. This was the closest game of the week. And it was a blowout for the Wildcats, was blowing the Express out of the water. And then all of a sudden the Express closed that gap and made this a Sunday night finish. The Wildcats with 561. Tammy, she moves to 11-7-1. And the Express, 494 points. That's Ruben. He moves to 9-10. Very interesting week. Like I said, a lot of blowouts. We had one close game in there. That was a Sunday finish. But Week 19, if you're looking for close ball games, is pretty much a dud. So... and we'll move on from there and go on to this week.
Thomas, for that look back at last week, Week 19, we're going to go ahead and take a look at last week's top performers for last week. For the Georgia Dominators, you had Alvarez at 69 points, Berkman at 52, and Hunter Brown at 44. For the Gatlinburg Cubs, Morrell was at 60, Josh Hader was at 32, and Juan Soto was at 27. For your Demon Ducks, Schwaber was at 55, Glasnow was at 53, and Matt Olson, finally starting to heat up for the season, was at 41. But for your Macon Chili Dogs, Soler was 51, Bobby Witt was 40, and Zach Eflin turned in a whopping 37 points last week. And for your Warner Robin Bombers, the Chicago Cubs Japanese pitcher Imaga, I'm sure I'm going to say this wrong, Imagaga, 41 points, De La Cruz with 34, and Anderson at 33. For Just a Little Crazy, Webb was at 58, Ober was at 39, and Miller was at 33. For your Atlanta Express, who's fallen 9-10 and starting to fall out of graces, Maia was 37, Valdez was 35, and Flores was 34. For the Wildcats, Hernandez was at 53, Castillo was at 53, and Adams was at 52. So the Wildcats had another big, exciting week. But now we're going to turn it back to Thomas to go ahead and take a look ahead of next week's schedule and what's on tap. Remember, folks, we've only got 2 weeks left in this regular season. So, Thomas, let's go ahead and send it to you for your look ahead, brought to you by the Alan Lindsay Movie Memories Museum, and take a look at your playoff preview.
Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at this week's Week 20 slate of games. First off, we're going to start off with the game of the week, the game that's interesting. The series is tied 1-1. You have Just a Little Crazy, that's Dan, at 12-6-1, and versus the Georgia Dominators, that's myself at 12-7. This is a crucial game. The Dominators are a half game behind. For seed purposes, the Dominators can make their way up to number 1 with a win here and a win over the Demon Ducks, or if the Demon Ducks happen to lose the game, and vice versa. So that's an interesting ball game to keep a track on, a playoff championship preview, potentially. The next game on the schedule, you have the Warner Robin Bombers, that's Jackson at 7-12, facing the Demon Ducks, Greg Lindsey at 12-7. Interesting ball game here because this is a game that Jackson's had some fight 5 of the last 7 weeks, and the last couple of weeks he's been on a downward slope, but still, this is one of those trap games right here. The next game, you have the Chili Dogs at 7-12 versus the Atlanta Express at 9-10. And this is a crucial game. Can the Express get off the snide with their losing streak? We'll have to see on this one. And the finale, you have the Wildcats, that's Tammy, at 11-7-1 versus the Gatlinburg Cubs at 5-14. Interesting game here. Probably another laughter for the Wildcats over the Cubs. But that has been a look at your Week 20 and what's going on this week.
I'm here in the studio looking at our Week 19 Power Rankings, brought to you by East Tennessee Media. Coming in at number 1 spot, Just a Little Crazy at 12-6-1. Coming in at number 2, you got the Wildcats, who's 11-7-1. Let's keep in mind, let's keep that close eye on that 1-1. That could play out very big, especially with the matchup the Wildcats have this week with the Cubs. So that's going to be kind of an interesting look. Number 3, you've got the Georgia Dominators at 12-7, with the Demon Ducks right behind them at 12-7. The Ducks are kind of proving what I made earlier this year, where I said earlier in the beginning that the Ducks, I think, will kind of tread water. I don't see the Ducks taking off. I don't see them falling down. I just see them kind of treading. Well, they're kind of starting to follow that scheme. You've got the Atlanta Express at 9-10, who's coming in at that number 5 spot. Number 6 is the Macon Chili Dogs at 7-12, followed by the Warner Robin Bombers, who's also 7-12 at number 7. And coming in 8 is, as lately, the Gatlinburg Cubs at 5-14. It has not been a pleasant year for the Gatlinburg Cubs. Hopefully next season will be better. But that's a look at your playoff rankings. So let's go back to that Atlanta studio for Thomas for his look at his playoff preview. Thomas?
Let's go ahead and take a look at the standings as they stand. Right now, number 1, you have Dan, Just a Little Crazy, at 12-6-1, and officially has clinched a playoff spot. At number 2, you have Greg with the Demon Ducks. He's at 12-7. He's got a 97% chance to make the playoffs, so pretty much Greg needs a win over the next 3 weeks. You have Thomas with the Georgia Dominators. That's myself at 12-7. Also tied with Greg for number 2. I've officially clinched a playoff position. And you have Tammy the Wildcats at number 4, 11-7-1, a game behind Dan for the top spot. And her team is 98% likely to make the playoffs. Then you have the Atlanta Express. That's Ruben at 9-10. He's got a 5% chance to make the playoffs. And then at 6, you have the Chili Dogs at 7-12, eliminated. And you have the Warner Robin Bombers at 7-12, eliminated. And the Gatlinburg Cubs at 5-14, eliminated from the start of the season. Here's the deal with the playoff seeds right now. First off, let's go ahead and talk about that 4 and 5 spot. Tammy's got a 2.5 game lead over the Express. But if Tammy were to lose, her Wildcats were to lose the last 3 games, she would finish 11-10-1. If Ruben's Express were to win 3 in a row, he would finish at 12-10. He would have a half game advantage over the Wildcats. So that number 4 spot is not settled, not by the least. Now, granted, if the Wildcats do win this week, it's over for the Express. But still, it's not exactly a done deal We've seen teams lose 3 and 4 and 5, 8 in a row on this league this year. So it's not exactly a walk in the park for the Wildcats. So right now, your playoff positioning, you would have Dan versus Tammy, 1 versus 4, Greg versus Thomas, 2 versus 3. And the top 4 spots are all unsettled. Take the Express out for a sec. The top 4 spots are all separated by 1 game. So it still is anybody's ball game, and these matchups could change and will probably change as we get on the next 3 weeks into the playoffs. Right now, I think the matchups are really interesting. You've got Dan, the Wildcats, versus the Just a Little Crazy. That could be an interesting showdown. And then you have Greg versus Thomas, 2 versus 3. If that's a first-round playoff game, that's another interesting one. And we do have a couple of things on tap. Dan this week has got a tough game against myself, the Georgia Dominators. And later on in the year, Greg does have to play the Dominators one more time. So that could be very interesting. That could be a number 1 clincher or whatnot. But it really don't matter where you finish. You don't get nothing special for finishing at the top. It matters getting into that playoff spot. You're dangerous from anywhere. If you're number 4, you could knock out that top seed immediately. So it's all interesting to see how this is going to play out. And that's a look at your standings as of right now and playoff preview.
And we've got for the day. Hope everybody looks forward to the bullpen coming up Thursday, and only a couple more weeks before game day. Game day is debuted, our college football fantasy show. We've also got an NFL show coming up for the NFL League as well. Only a few more weeks till football season. But as always, be sure to go to Facebook and like East Tennessee Media and our Cashin Sports page. And go on YouTube and subscribe and like the East Tennessee Media and Cashin Sports. We enjoy bringing these videos to you just as much as we hope you enjoy watching them. So I hope everybody has a great night.